Hi everybody, welcome back once again to the Eastfield Gunroom YouTube channel with me, Matthew Morgan. First big announcement, you will notice I have had a haircut. So if you want to know the full story, stay tuned till the end and I'll tell you more. So today's video is something completely different. We are going to be looking at one of our essential guides once more, and the subject of conversation today is a massive one. We're going to talk about Gunfit and what I believe are the 5 most important things that you need to know. Today's video, as ever, is proudly sponsored by the British Shooting Show, which is the largest event in the British shooting calendar. If you do enjoy our videos, do give us a like, do hit subscribe, because not everybody does it, and we do appreciate your support, and ultimately will help to grow the channel and bring me and my various haircuts to you weekly. So like I said, we're going to talk about Gunfit, and we're going to focus on what I believe are the 5 key things that you need to know, a bit more about Gunfit, the importance, etc. But before we do that, you might remember last month we launched a competition to win a pair of Belek chokes. It was on the Beretta DT11 Black Edition review. If you haven't seen that, do check it out. It's a fantastic review. If you need any information on Belek chokes, do contact us directly. So it's time for the winner. We had about 70 plus entries, which was quite good because I had to write a little bit of paper for every single one. Now, if the wind doesn't blow this away in real time, we have got a traditional method of drawing the winner. So we've got names in a hat, because that's the best thing we could come up with. We haven't got a lottery machine to hand. So they're all here on little bits of paper. I'm going to have a rummage around. If we have a drum roll, please. The trombone. And the winner of a pair of Belek chokes of their choice is at Red Eye Fox 05. So congratulations at Red Eye Fox 05 or 05 or OS, whatever my writing says. Do get in touch with us, details are on the screen, and we will be able to sort those pair of Belek chokes for you. You can get them in your gun, you can go out shooting in the sun, and hopefully you'll give us some feedback on those chokes. Commiserations to all those that took part and didn't win a set of chokes, but don't worry, there's going to be more Belek choke competitions, and indeed more competitions coming up on the channel in the very near future. I do have to point out that of all those entries, there was one person that actually put that we'd reviewed a Miraku pomegranate. We are still searching for that gun. If anyone knows where we can find one, please comment below, and I believe we will absolutely be doing the world's first review on that model. So enough of pomegranates and chokes, let's get on with today's video. So I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what Gunfit is and why it is so very important. I get a lot of customers, lots of emails, phone calls, and I'll be honest with you, 80% of the communication I have with a lot of my clients is based around Gunfit. That tells you how important it is when you consider buying or owning a shotgun. So the basics of it is it's all about the suitability of that gun for a specific individual. If you can imagine you went to go shopping for a suit and you came out of the changing room with a pair of trousers on that were 9 inches too long in the leg, you would ultimately have some problems with those pair of trousers. You're probably going to trip over, you're probably not going to have a coat hanger long enough in your wardrobe. So there's issues straight away, and it's no different with Gunfit. You need something that is suitable in terms of your stature, your physical features, and also your capability in terms of strength, etc. And these are all key things you should consider when you're looking at owning a particular shotgun. Gunfit itself is a bottomless topic of conversation. We could talk about it all day in terms of some of the finer points. We could get into custom stocks, that kind of stuff. That's not the purpose of this video. The purpose of this video is to condense it into what I believe are the 5 key points, the things you should know when you next go and get your gun out of the cabinet or you're looking to buy a shotgun. There may be a number of viewers that have been shooting for a long time that know about everything that I'm going to talk about. They live and breathe shooting. That's absolutely fantastic. And if you do want to add anything to what I've put, or maybe even contest it, feel free to put it in the comments below. But if you're a new shooter, you are a bit confused with some of the terminology, you've been looking at reviews of shotguns on our channel, of course, where else, and you don't know what makes, models might be suitable for you because you don't know what stock length you need, etc., then hopefully this will give you a few tools to arm yourself with to make that informed decision. So number 1, we're going to talk about stock length. I do want to point out, however, that out of these 5 points, they are in no way, shape or form in order of any kind of importance. They are all important in their own right. I'm just picking them in the number and the order they've come into my head. So, stock length. It stands to reason that if you are a short person, you are going to need a shorter stock. And if you are a very tall person, like I'm 6'4", you are going to need a particularly long stock. What it's important to consider when you go and look at a gun, or you try one and just see how suitable it might be for you, is that the parameters of what is normal are not actually that vast. Standard sporting stock, standard game stock, standard trap stocks on all modern shotguns are somewhere between 14.5 and 15 inches long. Now that's the length of pull. So before we move on, it's important to understand what the length of pull is. So I'm going to pick up a gun just to indicate that. So the length of pull is always measured from the trigger. If it's got an adjustable trigger, you should always have the trigger in its middle position. So if you've got a XS Pro, for example, like this is, with the trigger in the middle position, and we take a measurement across the middle of the pistol grip to the center of the back of the stock, and that is known in the gun world as the length of pull. There is also ways where you can measure it from the heel and of the toe. However, for the simplicity of this explanation, we are talking about length of pull, middle of the trigger to the back of the stock in the middle, 14.5 to 15 inches. So if we start at the kind of what I believe is the shortest stock you might need, what you tend to find is ladies' guns like Beretta Vittorias, Browning Liberty Lights, we've got, there's a Fabarm Elos Siren. They will all start at around about the 13.5 inch stock length, because that is what those manufacturers have decided is the optimum length for most female shooters that gun is going to appeal to. Don't worry, however, because they are easy to extend and they are easy to shorten. I've got here in my hand a couple of profile recoil pads. So if you go and buy a new Beretta Silver Pigeon, a 694, whether it's a game or a sporting gun, there is always the option to change the pads for a shorter or a longer one. If it is that you need a much shorter stock, we then have to go into the dramatic stance of cutting it with a saw. However, just take into account that if you do start hacking bits of wood off, the original recoil pad that you've removed will not go on. Over the years, I've seen a number of people that have cut a piece of wood off and then tried to glue it on. It always looks like a pig's ear. So I wouldn't recommend you do that if you can avoid it in any shape or form. Like I said, most modern day manufacturers have a profile pad system that will give you about 1.5 inches of adjustment depending on your height, your stature, your requirements. So you should be okay. Now, I'm going to take a gun that's got a little short stock. This is a little 20 gauge Beretta, which has been fitted to a lady, and the stock is 13.5 inches. Now, if I mount the gun, you can see that my face is right up by my thumb. So the gun, in essence, is too short. Now, what we're looking for from a stock length point of view that's kind of okay is we're looking for a gap of about 2 to 3 fingers between your nose and your knuckle. So we'll take this Browning, for example, with a 15-inch stock. You can see that's much more suitable because when I mount the gun, I've got this little gap here of my 2 fingers, which means it's going to be much more comfortable and I'm going to get a better shooting experience. It's also linked directly to the height of the comb, which we're going to move on to shortly. But just to kind of clarify what I've just said, there's always going to be short stocks, long stocks, depending on what you need, and most importantly, how tall you are, how short you are, your physical attributes. You would look at a normal stock as kind of 14.5 to 15 inches. Always bear in mind that I've got another example here. Look up, so many guns here, okay? Now, this is a Miraku MK60. We all love a Miraku. If you were a tall guy, then always look for a gun that's got a good degree of wood to start with. That's a 15-inch stock, but it's only got a little tiny butt plate, which means if you need to extend it considerably, it's still going to look okay. If we look at aftermarket recoil pads, for example, yes, you can put a pad on a gun, but they very rarely go above about 30 millimeters in length. So then you're into kind of spacers, etc. And then you're going to start really affecting the aesthetics of the gun and the overall appearance to yourself and of course other shooters if you're going game shooting. So look at it from a point of view of standard 14.5 to 15 inches. Usually shorter people need a shorter stock, usually taller guys need a longer stock. It is as simple as that. Obviously if you're a short person, you pick up a gun with a very long stock and you've got an enormous gap, obviously this is exaggerated, that's going to be no good. You're not going to progress with your shooting and it really shouldn't be where you start out. It's also worth pointing out that the stock length usually is related to your position on the forend, and if you've got a gun that's too long for you like this and your hand is further back towards the action, that's a telltale sign that that stock is also too long. The final thing I'm going to say on stock length is don't be afraid to have a gun altered. They are very, very easy to alter in terms of the stock length. If it's not a question of 2 screws and changing the recoil pad, if a gunsmith has to fit a pad, you're only going to be looking somewhere between maybe 50 and 200 pounds. The thing you must do is, of course, particularly from a new shooting point of view, or if you've set your budget on a particular gun, is just allow for that in that budget. Number 2 is stock height. Now for me, although I said I wasn't going to put them in order of importance, this is probably the most critical one for me. Now, we do a lot of adjustable comb conversions here at Eastfield Gunroom. If you want to know more about that, or you want to know more about this particular subject of stock height, there is a video. The details are on the screen now. Check it out. There's a lot of information in there. So again, it boils down to physical attributes, your stature, your shape, the height of your cheekbones, the length of your neck, the roundness of your face, and that all comes down to what kind of stock you require. So I'm going to go back to my little MK60 Sporter. Okay, this is actually a high pheasant gun. Now, before I talk about this, it's important to not get bogged down with the terminology of sporting guns, of trap guns, because those guns will have different stock dimensions because they are specifically manufactured for a different shooting discipline. However, there are a lot of sporting shooters, Graham Sturzaker, Martin Myers, those kind of people that spring to mind, that have enjoyed great success with a trap gun because ultimately the trap specification of a trap stock suits them better. So it's not that they're not shooting trap with a trap gun, it's just that the stock is working better for them. Right, so when we take the stock, this is the comb, it's the top end of the stock. There are 3 measurements. Now we've got the drop at comb, the drop at heel, and then the face measurement, which essentially is where you put your head when you're shooting. With a game stroke sporting stock, if we draw a straight edge across here, there is typically about 20 to 22 millimeters of drop on a sporting stroke game stock. For example, if you go and buy a new Silver Pigeon 1, a Beretta, it will be 35-55, so we've got 35 millimeters drop at comb and 55 millimeters drop at heel. If we go back historically, Beretta used to put 38-60 stocks, and now that's very, very low because it's already lower here and it's lower at the back, and that's going to fit very, very few people off the shelf. Thankfully, over the years, Beretta have learned their lesson and they've now started to build higher stocks. So as a basic rule of thumb, we've got 20 to 22 mil of drop on a sporting stock. Some exceptions to the rule. The main one that springs to my head will be Blaser. Usually with an F3, they are kind of 38-50, so you've only got 12 mil of drop. But what that does is it kind of takes away any issues with an inconsistent gun mount, because the less drop you've got, whether you put your head here or whether you put your head here, the sight picture is the same because you are taking away that degree of drop, which will aid particularly new shooters by having an almost parallel comb. So in direct contrast, we pick up a trap gun. This is an MK10 Black Edition, and you can see straight away just by looking at it, that is almost parallel. You haven't got the drop away on the top of the comb. So we've actually got, I think, 32-40 here. Now, typically with a trap gun, you'll get somewhere between 8, it's usually 10, 8 and 12 millimeters of drop. Because of the way it's designed, the gun's designed to shoot a little bit higher, there's a bit more wood in it. So it basically means for someone like me, with having that higher stock, when I mount that gun, absolutely lovely. I can see, got a good sight picture, and by that I mean I can see over the top of the breech. With a lower gun, with that Miracle, for example, I will be looking at the back of the top lever, and that is simply down to the fact that I am 6'4" with a long neck, and that gun isn't suitable for me, whereas this one, with much less drop and an almost parallel comb, is much, much better. If you take it as the rule of thumb that if you are tall, you are probably going to need a longish, highish stock, you won't go very far wrong. In terms of the height, we've got a little trick we do again in the adjustable comb video, which is where you might have seen this. If you mount the gun in the correct position and we put a pound coin, I've got a pound coin somewhere, look, yeah, I'm in the money, right? Just where the barrels meet the breech, there's usually a line because of course most guns are of sleeved manufacture, in your shoulder, then the foresight bead, which is the bead at the front, you should just be able to see that on the top of the pound coin. Now that'll be a gun you use for kind of sporting or game shooting, sort of a 60-40 setup. If you wanted to shoot dedicated trap, you'd really want a gap of about 2 or even 3 quid, because of course we're shooting a rising target that's going away all the time, and the gun as a trap gun, as the specification of a trap gun is to shoot a little bit higher, usually sort of 70-30. We'll talk more about patterns and that kind of stuff in a video in the future without confusing you too much at this stage. One of my favourite kinds of stocks is a Monte Carlo, and that basically means you've got a drop away so the gun sits perfectly in shoulder, but you don't have to bend your head too far down. It's better for people with long necks, particularly females, because they have very long necks and very high cheekbones. Most female orientated guns come with them these days. There's a lot of them on kind of Kriegoffs as well. Blars do a lot of Monte Carlos. You can get them on Berettas. They definitely lend themselves. Caesar Guerini is another one, to that kind of more head-up shooting position, which is more comfortable. And in some cases, it can also help with eye dominance. One thing I would say in terms of stock height, if you have a tendency when you go into a shop, I'll pick up a different gun now, this is a 694, to put the gun there to get it anything like comfortable, then that's too high out of your shoulder pocket and you're gonna need an adjustable comb. Really, the top of the shotgun stock should not go any higher than the top of your shoulder, and usually there's a nice little pocket you can just drop it into there. So if the gun's too high in your shoulder, it's because it's too low in the comb. Now this is something I want to show you. I've had this for about a year now and I use it for measuring all my stocks. You can measure it simply by having the gun on a straight edge, and I'll show you quickly what I mean by that. If you get this Browning, for example, we put it on the edge of the table. You can see it's quite apparent now, the drop. So what you would do is you'd measure up from the bottom and then of course at the bottom of the heel. However, that's not an exact science because usually you've got foresight beads, centre beads, that kind of stuff to take into account. If you do want to measure your stocks and you want to do it properly, I can recommend this tool that I have purchased from an Italian manufacturer, and basically it's very lightweight, very easy to use, and we'll show you in the B-roll. And basically what you do is you have got magnets in the front of it which magnetize to the rib in different size diameters depending on how wide the rib is. That goes along the back of the stock and that goes up and down and it gives you your measurement. Very accurate. I found it to be a fantastic piece of kit, and it comes in this cool little natty plastic case. You can carry it around like a suitcase. If you do want one, I think it was about 300 quid, something like that. So if you are into your shooting, you want to know what your guns measure, then I can recommend it completely. So point 3 is cast. Yes, it's a very famous band from Liverpool here in the UK, but it is also something you should absolutely know about and take into consideration when looking at a shotgun stock. Basically what cast is, it is the angle that the stock bends or deviates away from kind of where the barrels are in order to fit into the shooter's shoulder. So if you're a right-handed shooter, the stock will usually bend away from your face, which is called cast off. If you're a left-handed shooter, it will bend into your face, which is basically called cast on. Now, believe it or not, I have seen probably hundreds of people in the past that have purchased a gun unknowingly as a right-handed shooter and it's been sold to them and it's actually a left-handed gun. It's not that difficult to do. So if you know how to look for the basics, it will definitely aid you in your purchasing decision. So in terms of cast, how do you know what you need? Now, usually if you are of, again, it goes down to stature, physical features, it's all ties into one when we talk about gun fit and we talk about stock dimensions and stock attributes. If you are quite broad shoulders, you will normally need a bit of cast because you've got to put the shotgun further away from you to be able to get your head or your dominant eye down the top of the rib. Now, going back to the whole thing with people being sold left-handed guns and they're right-handed shooters, there is also a large contingency of people that will try and get particularly females to shoot off the left shoulder even though they are right-handed, because they don't want them to close an eye. My advice there, and again we could get into eye dominance and coaching, that kind of stuff, we could be here for hours. My advice to you is you should always shoot off the shoulder that feels the most comfortable and the most natural. If you have to shut an eye, like a lot of shooters do, shut an eye. So when you go to look at a gun, the basics I would say you need to know is it's a good idea to know which guns have got the most cast and which guns have got the least cast. So typically if you pick up an Italian gun, Beretta, Zolli, Caesar Guerini, it will have more cast than something like a Browning or a Miracle. In fact, there's a lot of left-handed shooters that can actually shoot Brownings and Miracles because they're fairly neutral cast very well. If you are looking at a dedicated left-handed gun, there's going to be quite a degree of cast, okay? And also with competition guns like this MK10, there'll always be a palm swell on the left hand side too, which means that you'll know instantly when you pick it up. You might go, oh, that gun looks really nice, it's absolutely within my budget. Oh, it's got a left-handed palm swell, I'm not left-handed, put it back. In terms of actually measuring cast, it's measured again away from the parallelity of the barrels, okay? So if we draw a straight line down there, what they do is to bend them, or to, obviously people manufacture actual right and left-handed stocks, but if you were to have a gun bent or, you know, cast by a gunsmith, what they do is they kind of heat it up, or with the heat lamps and lasers and all sorts these days, heat basically to push it across, and there'll be 3 measurements, because of course you can't bend it as much at the top because there's more wood, and it will go over further at the bottom. One thing you should always take into account, if you've got a very short stock, it's quite hard to bend because there's not a lot of wood in the first place. And also with a number of guns like Brownings and Miracues, they actually have a steel bar, steel collar over the stock bolt, which makes them almost impossible to bend. So my advice there would be look at an adjustable comb, because as well as of course the up and down, we also get the windage with left and right, and you can do a lot of things with an adjustable comb in terms of gun fit. So once again, if I revert back to my space age stock measuring tool from Italy, that also measures cast. So you've got a little blue plastic perspex thing on the back with some measurements, which reminds me very much of when I was 12 and I was at school using a protractor in maths. My final point on cast is if you've got a gun that's heavily cast and you don't need it, you're going to get more felt recoil, you're not going to be able to get your head across the stock, and ultimately you're going to be uncomfortable and you're probably going to get smacked about. Exactly the same with the opposite. If you've got a gun that's got no cast on and you need some cast, it's going to dig in and you're going to need some alterations as well. Don't get me wrong, with modern day guns, people don't tend to have them cast like they did 40-50 years ago by a gunsmith. So usually if you pick up a modern Browning Beretta or something, it's quite often as it came out of the box in terms of cast, because a lot of people will actually favour having an adjustable cone fitted these days to get that adjustment. So fourth on the list, we're going to look at pitch. Now pitch is basically the angle from the top of the back of the stock in a straight line downwards essentially, and that determines where the gun sits in the shooter's shoulder. Now if you've got a gun that's got absolutely no pitch, it is pretty parallel, okay? With a sporting gun, you would usually get somewhere between 82 and 90 degrees, so a little bit of pitch. And once again, it all comes down to your physical attributes, the shape of your body. For example, females need more pitch. If you look at a Beretta Vittoria, you look at a Browning Liberty Light, there will be more pitch because, of course, the gun will sit differently in the shoulder. Now, it's not a huge thing. It's all about, with shotguns and recoil pads and stocks and where they go in the shoulder. I'll just mount this again to show you. It's all about having as much contact as possible with your body and the pad. If you've got a gap, as you can see here, because I've badly mounted this gun, the gun's too high in the shoulder, you can see the gap. Now that's because of the comb height, but if you've got a gun that's got a lot of pitch or not a lot of pitch, you're going to have the same problem and you're not going to get the contact. To give you an example, I quite often have to change the pitch on guns for people that go to the gym a lot. You know, they've got an interesting shaped body because they're really big up top. You get people with sloping shoulders, all that kind of stuff. Now, of all the alterations I would recommend you have done by a gunsmith, it's usually not pitch, because if you start cutting wood at an angle and you ever want to revert back or sell the gun or whatever, you've got to cut a whole chunk off to make it parallel again to put a normal recoil pad on. So I've got a little tip that means you can save yourself a few quid and you can change the pitch on your gun. If you find that you're not getting full contact in your pocket here, here's my handy little tip. All you need is a screwdriver to remove the pad or to loosen off the pad, and some of these handy little washers. And what that does is that washer will sit between the screw and the pad, and it would just angle that stock that little bit more. I do a lot when I'm doing female gun fitting, and also, like I said, guys that go to the gym that do a lot of bodybuilding usually require a bit more pitch, and this is a brilliant way of not altering anything, not cutting any wood off, but just making sure you've got that optimum comfortable shooting position. So to summarize pitch, it's all about the contact between the pad and your shoulder and giving you the most comfortable shooting experience you can get. If you've got too little or not enough pitch, ultimately it's going to affect you in terms of recoil and it's also gonna, you get people that kind of fidget around with the stock in the shoulder, and that's not a good thing when you're trying to get a consistent mount to be a consistent shooter. So the fifth and final point, thanks for staying with us, well done, you've made it, completed it, mate. It's a little bit less critical than the height, the length, even the cast and the pitch. They're all very, very, very important things. I do like to point on this because I do get a lot of people that have an issue with their shooting and they don't quite realise what it is, and when you point it out they go, flipping heck, I never even thought of that, Matt. And that is simply the forend shape or the forend thickness. And the easiest example I can give you is if you've got a female, for example, that's only got quite small hands, and you give them a gun with a really big chunky forend like a beaver tail. We all know I love a beaver tail on this channel. They're just not going to be able to hold the gun properly, and ultimately they're going to cant it. And what I mean by cant it, they're going to twist the gun, and then everything we've done back here, we've worked on the comb height, the stock length, and we've got that stock fitting nicely. It all kind of goes out the window because it's all about being comfortable and being consistent and working towards a consistent gun mount. You get a lot of people when they first start shooting, they shoot gun up. Eventually want them to kind of shoot a bit more gun down. So the gun has to feel like an extension of your arm. And when you've got the wrong shape or the wrong style forend, that's just never going to happen. So bear in mind, that is something to take into consideration. So my recommendation with people for smaller hands is go for a kind of a schnabel forend, a bit like on this Miracle, because that's not super, super wide. The older Berettas in particular are very, very slim and dainty, as are the new ones in all fairness. And if you've got big hands, then go for that beaver tail. I always talk about that beaver tail on things like an XS Pro or an MK10. They are usually like of a reduced beaver tail. If you've got massive, massive hands, then what you want is you want an MK38 with the original beaver tail, which is that really big chunky one. It is only a small point, but like I said, if you do all the homework and you get those dimensions right and you've got a gun that fits right in the shoulder and it fits in the face, you've got a good sight picture with the pound coins, which is only like a rough guide, so to speak. It's a shame to ruin it all just for the sake of a forend. And let's not forget, with most manufacturers, you can change the forend. Dead easy to do yourself, usually a couple of torque screws or grub screws, change the wood over, and then you've got a much better, much more comfortable shooting experience. So principally there are three styles of forend. We've got the schnabel, we've got the rounded, which has not got the lip, and we've got the beaver tail. Now, don't worry, it's not a deal breaker. I've seen many gunsmiths over the years slim down forends, remove the lips. People don't like the lips. There's a lot of stuff you can do to make a forend more suitable for your kind of hand size and shape. My suggestion to you would be focus on the back end of the stock, because that's the most crucial part. And we've talked about obviously stock length, stock height, the cast and the pitch. If you have all that information to hand, I believe that when you next go and look at a shotgun or even take your existing shotgun out of the cabinet, you will have learned, hopefully, something that's going to help you progress with your shooting. What kind of ties in with the forend and we haven't really covered is, of course, the grip, but these tend to go kind of hand in hand. If you've got a big chunky forend, you quite often will have a chunky gun with a big pistol grip or a big palm swell. It goes without saying, if you've got little hands, you don't need a big palm swell, you don't need a big grip. But let's not forget, these are guidelines. There's nothing set in stone here, and what you should always do is go with your personal preference and not forget that any of these things we talked about are all changeable. They can all be customized specifically to you and your shooting requirements and shooting needs. So that's been my top 5, I believe, most important things to consider in terms of gun fit. I've hopefully imparted some knowledge onto you. If I haven't, I don't know what happened and I can only apologise. If you have enjoyed the video, do please give us a like, do hit subscribe, because we do appreciate your support. This video, as ever, is sponsored proudly by the British Shooting Show. Don't forget to check out the website. If you've got any questions about gun fit or any comments, comment below, send me an email. I'll be more than happy to help and talk as in-depthly as possible about all the subjects we've covered. We do, of course, offer gun fitting services at Eastfield Gunroom. Let's not forget that, because it's not currently mentioned on the website. And if you're wondering what happened to my hair and you're still here, basically I visited the barbers that I used to go to as a young boy, which is now owned by the son of the late father who used to cut my hair. Told him what I was doing and he went, "You're wasting your time, mate, let's cut it all off." So I'm no longer going to look like Pat Sharp. I've got a much more normal, much more manageable haircut. So once again, feel free to comment about that, although you are going to be seeing the grey again soon. From me, Matthew Morgan, with a new hairstyle, our essential guide to the 5 top points for gun fitting. I'll see you next time.